Hello students, it's Professor Russo again, and let's take a look at more of team preparation. We're in chapter 4 of Debra and Poole's textbook, and we looked at some aspects of team preparation, and we're going to focus on a couple more that are really important. I keep expressing that they're important, and preparation is half the battle. That's the key takeaway here. So one of the things that I didn't talk about in the last audio cast was the potential for multiple forms of abuse. And in child abuse, there's almost always some indicia, some evidence of multiple forms of abuse. Some of it not so significant, and some of it is significant. Think about it this way. If a person, whether it be a stepdad or a grandfather or some other person, is the kind that would hurt a child, molest a child, or injure a child, they're probably the same kind of person that might assault or molest or hurt their wife or their significant other. If someone can harm a child that they're supposed to care for, someone that they should love, someone that should trust them, it's not a great leap to hurt or harm or injure or menace or do something assaultive to other persons they care about. And in most cases, that's the mother or the wife or the spouse. So you want to see whether there are other forms of abuse, not only in the household, but also to the child. So if it's a sexual abuse case, you want to focus on whether that child may have also been physically abused or emotionally abused. And it goes hand in hand almost that the perpetrator will treat that child in a very negative way. Although sometimes, depending upon the relationship, they may treat that child with very positive reinforcement. So you need to take a close look at the relationship between the perpetrator and the child victim, and the relationship between the perpetrator and the child victim's mother or caregiver or someone else important to that child. And something else I would share with you, there is a correlation, and it's no surprise, between physical abuse of children and domestic violence on intimate partners and animal abuse. Same kind of analysis. If a perpetrator is the kind of person who would injure a child or molest a child, they're the kind of person who might injure or molest their girlfriend or wife or spouse or someone that's near and dear to them. And they're also the kind of person who wouldn't have any qualms with exploding at or injuring the pets, whether it be a dog or cat or some other kind of animal. And that kind of violence towards animals obviously is injurious to the animals, but it also creates a atmosphere of negativity, fear, and hostility in the child and in the family dynamic. So one of the things that we suggest is, if it comes up, if there's something that you learn about the companion pets, whether it be a dog or cat, for example, where the child says, well, we used to have a dog. Well, what happened to the dog? Daddy said he went away, or he ran away, or he got lost. Daddy kicks him, whatever. If there's some information about violence towards animals, that could be supportive of, corroborative of violence towards the child and violence towards the caregiver. And perhaps equally important, we need to address that. Hostility in the household can have very significant consequences on everyone in that family. So multiple forms of abuse has to be examined. The next thing that's important, and it's important because it is relevant to the quality of your investigation. One of the things that defense lawyers point out is that interviewers, forensic interviewers, police officers, law enforcement, district attorneys, and prosecutors often rush to judgment. They make assumptions about whether there was abuse or neglect, and they conclude that it's sexual abuse or that it's abusive, when in fact, if they examined it a little more closely, they would see that it wasn't abuse at all, that it was innocent behavior. That brings us to exploring the alternative hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis. One hypothesis could be that the child was sexually abused. The other hypothesis could be that grandpa was helping the child in the bathroom, or dad was applying medicine to the child's privates. We cannot jump to conclusions and make assumptions. We need to always think about whether the alternative hypothesis is relevant in this case. Now, Professor Poole and a number of academics have reacted to the defense lawyers arguing that you should always explore the alternative hypothesis. It's a good idea to think about the alternative hypothesis. Does it need to be explored in every case? I don't think so. Some cases, if what the child utters is completely unambiguous, there is no alternative hypothesis to explore. But I would suggest in most cases you ought to think about it. In most cases, it can't hurt to explore the alternative hypothesis. Let me give an example. Daddy puts his wiener in my gina and it hurts. And he makes me put his wiener in my mouth. Well, there's really no alternative hypothesis for those statements, right? It's not ambiguous in the least bit. Now, the child could be fabricating. The child could have learned that from an alternate source. Those are different inquiries. We're taking a look at what the child says the accused did, what the behavior was, and is there a plausible alternate explanation for that? That's what the alternative hypothesis involves. If you look over here, you see considering the alternative hypothesis. And I say there, if the assumption is that this was sexual abuse and that this dude did it, what are the alternatives for that assumption? Was it innocent contact? Maybe some other dude did it. So you want to explore the alternative hypothesis. Let me give you some examples. I touched upon a few a moment ago: medicine application, bathroom help, those kinds of things. For example, I had a case once that involved a karate instructor. Now, karate instructors, like parents and like doctors, are privileged in a way to have some limited contact with children, right? You sign up for karate instruction, you're a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old child, your parents sign you up, and the karate instructor may put his hands on your shoulders, may put his hands on your arms, just to show you the correct positioning. Just because he touched your body doesn't mean it was done in a negative way, that it was done in some malicious way or some sexual way. The case I had involved a child who asserted that the karate instructor touched her on her chest area. The parents and, of course, the authorities thought that this might be sexual abuse, that he may have been touching her breasts for sexual gratification. That's a case where you need to think about how you're going to approach the alternative hypothesis, because the karate instructor may have been just showing her the proper stance, the proper moves, and may have been placing his hands on her body innocently. Now, you might say he should never touch the child. Well, I'm not so sure that's a good way to be a karate instructor, but he certainly should share with the parents that there's a minimal amount of contact that occurs before he accepts students into his program. The bottom line is, should he go to prison? Did he commit a sex crime? And there are ways to examine that we'll look at later in the kinds of questions we ask the child or about that behavior. And we'll talk about that later in this course. But we're talking about teen preparation now. So is this a case where the assertion has a plausible, innocent explanation? I'll give you another example that we use in Child First Finding Words. In Child First Finding Words, we have a vignette or a hypothetical where a camp counselor, after swim class in the lake up at the camp, takes the children back to the camp headquarters or to the camp dorms. And one of the children said that the camp counselor brings us into the bathroom before we get back to the dorms, and he brings all the boys in there and he makes us shake our wieners. And he tells us we have to do it. And he shakes his wiener too. So the initial assumption might be for some that this is some kind of masturbation or sexual abuse or some kind of sexual misconduct. But one plausible explanation is it might not be the right thing a counselor should be doing, but he's a counselor, he's 19 years old, maybe he's telling them that they have to shake their penis after they pee in the urinal. That is an innocent explanation. Perhaps some might say bad judgment, who knows? But the bottom line is he's not a criminal and he's not a molester. That's a plausible, innocent explanation for the behavior. That's what we call the alternative hypothesis. And you need to ask yourselves, the team needs to ask themselves, is this the kind of case where there might be a plausible, innocent explanation? If there is, then the team talks about it. How do you approach it? What kind of questions do you ask? What do we want to know to remove this from an innocent case and demonstrate unequivocally, to the best of our ability, that this was sexual abuse? So those are two important things you need to focus on in a forensic interview team meeting. Potential for multiple forms of abuse on the child and within the family, including the pets and companion animals, and is there a plausible explanation that's innocent for the behavior that the child expresses?